Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest today is Wes Cow, and she's a translator of sorts. She helps tech founders and startups translate the technical, some would say gobbledygook, that they do into real language and concepts that people can understand, so that even though they may have these great technologies, if they can't communicate what they do well and market it and sell their product or their service, they're not really going to get anywhere. So Wes steps in, and she's like a marketing consultant that helps advise these kind of people. And I hope I've gotten that right, Wes. Is that an accurate description of what you do?
Yes, totally.
Okay, great. And Wes has her own consultancy firm now. So Wes, thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your background, your history, and what got you to this point to be a consultant.
Sure. I spent over 10 years doing marketing and product management in-house, working at a bunch of Fortune 500 companies like Gap, L'Oreal, Bare Essentials, and at smaller startups too. Flight, where I was head of digital marketing and content, which is acquired by Snapchat. And then most recently, I was the founding executive director of Seth Godin's Alt MBA school. So I worked closely with Seth, who's a best-selling author, for the past 3 years, building up his school from just an idea on a whiteboard into a global institution in 500-some cities, 45 countries, thousands of alumni around the world. And as of earlier this year, I left to launch my own consultancy. And now I focus on working with technical leaders, whether they're engineers, scientists, technologists, to help them better market and sell their innovations. And the crux of that is the idea that the best product and the best technology doesn't always win. And you can't just rely on technological differentiation anymore if you really want to stand out. You have to go that extra step to explain why your idea matters and really tell your story in a way that inspires people to take action.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't realize that that was your role with Seth Godin. I mean, that makes you like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of marketing with these big marketing muscles. That's really great.
Oh my gosh, I love that analogy.
All right. So tell me about, your thesis statement is, the technical details of products aren't what really excite people or maybe get them to use them or adopt them. So, can you give an example of, like a great innovation that, should be useful or helpful to people, but it fell flat because it just was talked about in a really boring technical way versus a story way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we think about every industry, if you ask experts in any industry, there's going to be examples that pop out where those who are familiar with the nuances of the space thought that, hey, we thought this was an amazing innovation, but for some reason it just didn't take off. And so many of the clients I work with have a really common complaint, which is there's some competitor that isn't doing anything particularly innovative. Their product is pretty surface level, and yet they're getting a ton of media attention. They're getting a ton of funding. People are talking about how exciting their technology is and how different it is. And meanwhile, the insiders are scratching their heads thinking, we've had this for years, and this is really nothing new. So this is a really common complaint that I hear. And I think there's a really important shift that technologists need to make, which is realizing and acknowledging that you as a founder or technical leader need to take personal responsibility for whether or not people understand why your idea matters and really translating why it matters. And the people who do that really reap the rewards. And we can gripe about it all day and complain about it, but unless we do something, you're just going to be, working hard on your product and then hearing crickets and tumbleweed once you launch.
So how do you work with entrepreneurs? Do you like lay them down on a couch and ask them questions and kind of boil down what they're telling you into plain English and marketing speak, or what's the process? Or do you just say, let me handle it, and you look at their product or their service and you're the one that comes up with how to respin it so it's compelling?
I have a do it with you approach. So if you think of a spectrum where on the one side it's do it yourself, and on the other side of the spectrum it's do it for you, do it with you is really in the middle, and it's training technical leaders to think differently about their role and to have a different mindset about what they should put their bandwidth towards. So a lot of it is one-on-one coaching, it's training workshops, it's consulting work, but essentially it's behavior change. It's how do I get this technical leader who's currently hyperlogical and got to where she or he is by being hyperlogical to relax on that a little bit and shift their frame of mind into thinking about how do I apply that same rigor and systematic thinking to appealing to my audience. So a lot of our work is helping leaders who are currently very hung up on science and facts and technology to shift away from that. And it's really interesting because a lot of them, as I said, got to where they are because they're rational, they're logical, they're skeptical people, they're critical thinkers, they're grounded in reality, the truth matters. I mean, all of these things are great. But unfortunately, if facts were enough, we wouldn't have climate change deniers, we wouldn't have anti-vaxxers, and a lot of things in the world would probably be more sane than they are. So it's acknowledging that, okay, facts are the basis of my work, but the next step to get to the next level is really about thinking about stories and consumer behavior and worldviews and connecting the dots so that audiences and customers and investors can be inspired by your technology enough to fund it, to use it, to buy it, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll give an example I heard about, like the George Foreman grill. I guess originally it was like this taco maker, and it wasn't selling well. And this guy Rick Cesare runs a marketing agency, and he got George Foreman, and they, it's the same product, but they said, oh, the fat drips away, and they demoed it, and they put George Foreman's name on it and everything, and they got the grill to sell like I don't know, $100 million worth when it was just this like plain old nothing product before that. Or the the Amish space heater. I remember on TV it was just like a space heater, but they said, oh, the Amish made the cabinet around it, and they had this whole story, and it sold millions of those. Or the Snuggie is just a blanket that you wear. So I guess those are like maybe crude examples of what good marketing can do to really boring products. Probably not as good as the stuff you work with, but those are some examples I know of.
Those are great examples. I started my career in consumer packaged goods and retail and apparel. So, I'd mentioned the Gap headquarters earlier. So jeans and socks. I mean, there's not much technical differentiation within the apparel category. Same with beauty. But these categories are entirely driven by marketing, by stories, by appealing to the person that people wish they could be. And there's a lot that more technical areas and technical fields can learn from these categories. And, if you're working with jeans and socks, you don't have much to work with in terms of saying, okay, our product features are that different. But, if you're working in robotics or AI or VR or digital medicine, there's almost too much technical differentiation. And you have the opposite problem, which is that your product actually has some interesting technology that is leaps and bounds better than what's existing now. And you tend to fall in love with that. And it makes sense because you understand the field like the back of your hand and you see why the innovation that you're working on is so groundbreaking. And it becomes very frustrating when the rest of the world, when your audience doesn't feel that same sense of enthusiasm. And it's easy to get into this cycle of frustration when that's the case, which is why it's so important to then pull back and say, okay, I acknowledge that we have this amazing technical differentiation, but we also need to think about why would someone want to use this? Why would they feel good using this? What does this say about their identity? And a good example that comes to mind about a product that failed to do this is the Segway. There's
I
millions.
had one of those years ago. They were cool, but now
Oh,
they
you did?
feel
Oh,
like
wow.
just
Okay.
nerd. Yeah, I
Yeah,
had one. I think actually 13 years ago or something. But now they just seem like nerd vehicles. I don't know. They don't seem really cool at all. They failed to
exactly.
catch on.
Yes, and they're the domain of mall cops and tourists,
Yep.
taking tours within a city on segways, and hundreds of millions of dollars were invested into that product, and by all means, it was an amazing innovation by a very renowned inventor, but because people didn't feel cool using it and they felt lame, it fell to the wayside. And people don't want to do things where they feel lame doing it. It's kind of like
Right.
it's kind of like smoking. Like did people stop smoking because all of a sudden they realized that it was bad for them? Well, not really, because the Surgeon General has been warning us for decades that smoking causes cancer. Didn't really change anything. But once the culture changes and you realize that it's not cool anymore, or within your immediate circle, a couple of your friends say, "Oh, ew, you smoke?" Or "You're still
Right.
smoking? Are you kidding me?" Right? It only takes
Yeah.
a little bit of shame like that for people to think, "Oh my gosh, wow, I should really stop smoking." So it's not so much the facts that change behavior. It's all the other stuff. It's the people around us. It's the stories that we tell each other, the stories that we tell ourselves about, hey, am I the kind of person who smokes? Because the other people in my community don't seem to smoke anymore, and maybe it's time that I let go of this habit.
So you said you try to work with very technical people, founders, etc. I can't see that all of them would come over to your side of thinking and say you're right, and I mean even be able to change. Some people are just fundamentally like tech nerds and they're stuck like that. So what do you do if you're dealing with a founder and they're like, hey, I hear you, but I'm just a technical person and it's just not me. I can't do that stuff. Do you do it for them, or do you say, hey, you need someone on your team that I can coach to get this message out while you're, back in the lab working on the technical stuff?
I love this question. Have you heard of the Rogers adoption curve? The bell curve with early adopters, innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. I'm sure you've seen that. Perfect. So
Yep.
if we imagine that curve, the people on the far right, the laggards, are the ones that you were just describing, with the technical founders that are really, they're digging their heels in. They think, no, like I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to stick with the technical stuff. This is baloney. This isn't going to, marketing's not going to change anything. And then on the far left are the innovators and early adopters, who are technical leaders who have started to see the light and are starting to think, hey, maybe I do need to think about the way that I describe my technology, because sometimes people get really excited about it when I talk about it, and other times I get blank stares. And maybe the way that I talk about it can change people's reactions. So there's a whole spectrum of technical leaders who are either ready to embrace using marketing as a lever, or skeptical and resistant to it. And I don't even try to work with people who are skeptical, because there's enough people who are eager and want to learn how to improve their marketing that that keeps me busy enough. So that's one point. And then the second is, if we think about a bullseye, so there's concentric circles, and I call it the concentric circles of customers. So I teach this to my clients, but even if I look at my own clients, we can use the concentric circles. So a good way to describe the concentric circles is thinking about Facebook. So Facebook initially started with Harvard only. So that was the middle of their bullseye, Harvard students. Okay, right. Super exclusive. And then the next rung were Ivy Leagues. Okay, now it's brought into several schools, also still very elite. And then it's colleges. That's the next rung. And then it's high schools. And then it's your mom and your grandma and your grandpa now all have Facebook. So if they had started trying to target your 14-year-old niece and your grandma with the same messaging, with the same marketing, with the same product, they would have fell flat. They would have fallen flat. But because they started in a really hyper-focused way and swarmed and really owned that market, they were able to then expand outer into the outer rungs. So I think about that a lot when I talk to my clients and when I think about the clients I work with myself, because in the middle, you have technical founders and leaders who are eager and ready to embrace looking at marketing as a lever. And on the far outer rungs, you have those laggards. And what I always teach my clients is you don't need to target the entire bullseye, all those concentric circles. You really just need to focus on your core and the immediate next rung around it. Because if you can convince your core, they'll help spread the message to the next rung, which will help spread the message to the next rung. And eventually the people on the far outer rungs, the super skeptical people, they're going to come around eventually. And it won't be because you talked until you were blue in the face. It's going to be because the rung immediately before them told them about this and said, hey, you need to check this out. This works. And it's probably going to be another technical leader telling them. And it's going to come from a place that's a lot more trustworthy, because that person's going to think, wow, if my friend who's just like me running a technical company cares about this, then there might be something to this.
Well, all right. So can you tell me an example? I don't know if you can say specifically, but someone you worked with and their product, was like deadly boring or not going anywhere, and you gave it a makeover and now it's doing well. What did it look like before? What was it called before? What's it called now?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to do that? Or is that proprietary?
It's proprietary, but I can give some general examples. So first, it doesn't happen in one step, and it's usually not a very glamorous, all of a sudden we turn from X into Y. It's a bunch of little things that when combined make the team and the technical leader a lot more comfortable talking about their product in a way that resonates. So sometimes we'll work on the slide deck, sometimes we'll work on the messaging on the website, sometimes we'll work on what a verbal pitch looks like when you have 5 minutes to explain to somebody what you do, or if you have 1 minute to explain to somebody, or if you need to explain your idea to a layman audience versus a really technical audience. What are things that you would do differently? How would you simplify the language, for example, or how would you give different analogies that help people better understand what it is that your product does? So a lot of it is small changes that add up to give leaders more clarity. So the concentric circles is a great example. I've had a lot of clients say that helps their team rally around understanding who is our core customer and how should we tailor the language across all of our marketing campaigns, all of our business development, all of our sales conversations, all of our recruiting and hiring when we describe what's our mission, what is this grand problem that we're solving, why is this exciting, why are we a rocket ship that you would want to get on. So that even a framework like the concentric circles can really help people simplify a lot of the complicated marketing jargon and language that sometimes can get too hairy, and just go back to basics and get people on the same page. Because ultimately, if your team is on the same page, if your executive team, your developers, your salespeople, your marketers are all aware of how to talk about what you do, it ultimately makes your company a lot stronger.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, all right, so you'd help a company develop not only multiple formats of the same story for different audiences, different levels of sophistication. Maybe they're like the closest inner circle or they're one circle out. So it sounds like they're making a multitude of ways to showcase their product depending on all these factors.
Exactly. And we'll look at things like social proof, for example. That's a huge area that, especially if you're doing something new that is disrupting a category or challenging the existing players in the market, a lot of times your buyers, your customers don't know how to contextualize what you do yet. And the challenge is that they were fine before you arrived, before you sent them, a sales email or went knocking on their doors, and they'll probably be fine without you. So the question is, why now? Why now for taking action, for purchasing from you, for going to the next step? And social proof is a really powerful and underutilized tool or framework or tactic that a lot of technical leaders can add and implement into their current marketing. So, example. So, what does social proof really look like? Well, testimonials. That's a great example. So, testimonials basically say, other people like me, who look like me with similar titles, who work at similar companies, have tried this and they liked it. Another example, investors. Okay, VCs were willing to put their cash money into this company. So that's also social proof. If I'm looking at your technology or your innovation and deciding, is this worth engaging with or not? Press, another great example. Okay, a famous magazine thought that this company was legit enough to write about. That also makes your idea feel safer.
Right.
A wait list of some kind, right? Or even seeing a long line. If we kind of move into the physical world, IRL a little bit, when we walk by a restaurant and we see that it's empty versus a restaurant where there's a line out the door, that's social proof too. And all of these things feel very irrational because they have nothing to do with legitimately, okay, if we were to rationally and objectively review your product, is this good or bad? All of these things feel outside of that realm, but help people make a decision as to whether your idea, which is new at the moment, is new and scary and risky and is probably going to be a waste of my money, or if it's new and exciting and something that I want to try.
Okay. Well, very good. So what's the best way, or who would be a good fit for you for the consulting and who wouldn't be? I mean, you already said someone that's closed-minded and thinks, technical details are the way to sway people. Obviously, they wouldn't be a good fit, but who would? What size company, what industry, who's your ideal client?
I would say open-minded technical leaders who understand that in order to get to the next level, they need to level up their marketing and their messaging and have a really strong story that they can present to investors, to customers, to the press, and are ready to invest in creating what that unified message really looks like. And it doesn't really matter, what industry you're in, because I've worked with technical leaders in all kinds of industries. It's really that understanding that marketing is a lever that can help your company grow and help your innovation and technology see the light of day and get the recognition that it deserves.
Okay, very good. And Wes, what's the best way to contact you? I don't know if people fill out a form or an application, or how do they get in touch with you to evaluate whether they should get consulting or not?
You can check out my website at weskao.com, and my email address is there. My Twitter is there. I write a blog twice a week, so you can subscribe to that for tips and advice on how to better tell your story. And I look forward to hearing from any technical leaders out there who are looking to level up.
Well, that's great. Wes, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.